The state of California, which has the largest homeless population in the United States, has just unveiled a new, very expensive proposal to essentially compel more people with psychiatric disorders and addictions into court-ordered cases. This would include some medication and housing, but there's some questions about the proposal. And here to talk about that is Mary Theroux. She's the senior vice president of the Independent Institute. She's also host of the documentary Beyond Homeless. Mary, first of all, what's your reaction to what California Governor Newsom is trying to do?
Well, it's certainly a part of a big puzzle, but it's also something of a fire, ready, aim mandate. We need resources first, and then we can figure out how to get people to access those resources.
Does it make sense, though, for the state of California to require, in some capacity, some institution to have responsibility to make sure that people who need psychiatric care can actually get it, as opposed to just being shuffled either into some sort of prison system or sent back out on the street?
Well, there certainly need to be facilities, and there are some people who are not capable of making the decision themselves to access care. Very limited people who need that. But again, we need a whole range of resources available for people who are having mental illness problems, and they simply do not currently exist. So we need to start with that.
And let's start with, if you had your wish list, and let's first talk about priorities in terms of, should this be a state issue? Should this be a county issue? Who would you prefer to tackle this?
Well, really, this is a problem. The homelessness problem as a whole cannot be solved by DC or Sacramento or even by City Hall. It really is a community-wide problem. The more we've looked into places that have dealt with homeless problems successfully, we see that it's every part of their community working very effectively together, strategically, systemically, to address the many, many individual causes that put people into homelessness in the first place, and the many, many resources that are needed for those individuals to transform their lives and get out of homelessness.
What are some of these specific tools? And let's just, for argument's sake, let's assume that there is this sort of system-wide efficiency that everybody's aiming for. What is it that, in terms of the first priority, in terms of these resources that could help a community in trying to figure out how to deal with this?
Well, we don't have to assume it. Our documentary, Beyond Homeless, Finding Hope, actually has an extensive case study of where it has been achieved. And that's in Bexar County, Texas, and they've been doing it for 11 years. With remarkable success. The first step is to bring every sector of the community together. You need the business community, government, obviously, you need community activists, you need all of the fire, police, EMS, and importantly, all of the nonprofits that are involved who are currently working mostly in silos. And they all need to come together, coordinate, develop a strategy, and then execute on that strategy. And again, we have a very good model of it working extremely well that other communities could easily replicate. They just need to stop thinking, well, City Hall is going to solve this or Sacramento is going to solve this, and understand that no, it's something that we all need to work together as a community to solve.
And I get that breaking down the silos, even in a particular community, can be very challenging. But assuming that a community is able to break down the silos and you're able to bring all these people to the table to deal with this, then what? What's the next step?
Well, then you execute on it. So certainly in Bexar County, they did it as a campus-wide model. Every nonprofit in the community offices there and provides resources there. The police are very integrated with it. It's an independently run organization that's therefore accountable to donors, to taxpayers, and to the community at large.
There was an effort in San Francisco, I think in the last 2 years, a proposal to try to create something like 6,000 beds for homeless. I think San Francisco's now, it houses about 3,700 people. Is that a helpful start? In other words, for a city to say, look, these are the number of beds that we're going to have built, regardless of the system in terms of keeping track of people and bringing all these shareholders together. Having that sort of goal, is that helpful?
Well, beds alone is not going to solve the problem because all you do is put someone inside and they're still dealing with their problems. So you have to have the resources that address why they fell into homelessness in the first place. Otherwise, history shows that they usually just fall out of the housing back into the street. So it's a vicious circle. The other problem with starting with beds is so-called permanent supportive housing is incredibly expensive, especially here in California. I mean, it starts at $500,000 per unit, and some of these developments are going up to $900,000 a unit. So there's simply not enough resources for the 161,000 people in California experiencing homelessness. If you just do it with beds, it's $80 billion. And then you have nothing left to provide the services that they need to resolve their problems and stay housed and stay on track to live independently.
You mentioned the 161,000 homeless as of, I guess, 2020, the last time there was a survey, I suppose, or analysis done. Has the reason for most homelessness, has that changed over the decades?
Homelessness is incredibly individualized, and people keep trying to make it a homogenous problem, and it really isn't. There are as many reasons for becoming homeless as there are individuals who experience homelessness. And that's why you need a really individualized approach for it. A lot of it, yes, is rooted in childhood trauma, but there are lots of other causes. Being hospitalized as an adult, certainly mental illness is a problem. Economics is a problem. The cost of housing in California is a problem. All of these things are problems, but you can't just say, okay, it's just housing, so all we have to do is provide housing and the problem's solved. It isn't. We have to deal with what's your story? What do you need to get out of homelessness? And have those resources available to each individual.
40 or 50 years ago, there was this sort of prevailing theory that a lot of homelessness was because, I guess in the 1960s, early 70s, a lot of these psychiatric institutions across the United States, in part because of terrible living conditions, were closed. And a lot of people who had a place or a campus or an institution to go to were suddenly on their own and out on the streets. Is that still a prevailing theme for a lot of people in that as well? There's just not enough psychiatric resources, psychiatric institutions for people to go to?
So it's correct that in 1963, JFK closed down most state mental hospitals, and it wasn't a bad decision. A lot of the state mental hospitals were not good places, and we're not advocates for locking people up to make them better. The problem is that nothing was created to replace that. So people were closed out of where they had been with nowhere to go and no services. It certainly is true today, continues to be true today, that there are inadequate psychiatric services and there are inadequate range of psychiatric services available. And then you can deal with getting the motivations for getting people into those services. But we do not have adequate psychiatric care of any kind here.
And whether it's trying to get adequate psychiatric care or simply trying to funnel resources in an efficient way and maybe identifying people and personalizing the resources for them, how much more complicated has it all become over the last 2 years because of the pandemic?
I don't think the pandemic has made that in particular more complicated. They've done a lot of housing people in hotels over the years, and that hasn't been a good experience. It isolates people, and we've seen a huge spike in overdoses in the period. So that's not a good solution. But it's not really a complication for this. You can have congregate settings that are safe. Haven for Hope in San Antonio, the model I was talking about in Texas, has continued to operate extremely effectively. And they deal with mentally ill as well as every other issue behind homelessness and do so very well.
For people who are not police or mental health workers or essentially in the field, so to speak, but are obviously aware of homelessness and want to do something, what are some of the lessons from, say, Texas that an ordinary citizen can draw upon as far as their own effort and their own life and their own community to try to make a difference?
Yeah, I organize and try to outreach and get together with others. That's what we're trying to do with our film and initiative Beyond Homeless, is to empower ordinary citizens to get together in their communities, engage with nonprofits, government, again, EMS and so on, and start having these conversations of, hey, here's a model. How can we apply those lessons to our neighborhood, to our city, to our state, and so on? And individuals are incredibly powerful. Haven was the original idea of one person, but it only came to fruition because he then got together with the city, the county, the nonprofits, and the community organizers, and so on. So anybody can instigate it, but the important thing is to get together with your community to make it happen.
And speaking of instigating, I mean, a lot of the media will have people believe in New York or Los Angeles that homelessness is horrible compared to how it was just a few years ago, that the streets are just rampant with people who are homeless. Has it really gotten that much worse, or is that just sort of a media misnomer?
I'm afraid that in San Francisco, it is most certainly true. I have spent a lot of time in the Tenderloin, which is kind of ground zero in San Francisco for where the homeless have traditionally sort of been shuttled. And I'm just amazed at how much worse it is now, which led the mayor about a month ago to declare the neighborhood to be an emergency. It's gotten extremely dystopian.
And what caused that? Or is there a simple cause or an explanation for that?
A lot of it is it's just been left unchecked. So people have gotten a lot more brazen about open drug use. The fentanyl, certainly we've had a huge stream of fentanyl come in, and fentanyl is a horrible, horrible drug that's had a very negative impact on the whole scene. But really, it's just a matter of we need to get in there and work with the individuals and help them.
Mary Theroux, she's the Senior Vice President for the Independent Institute. Again, the documentary is Beyond Homeless. Mary is the host of that. And again, it's an important issue, as we've heard in many cities. It is a growing problem, and certainly a lot of people are more concerned about trying to find some creative ways to make our communities more efficient in terms of how we tackle all this. Mary, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.